Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Path of Exile Skills. Well, Path of Exile 2 Skills. I gotta get that intro right. Today we're going to be looking at Refutation. Refutation is a pretty powerful ability that was introduced in 0.5, and it actually got nerfed already. That's how powerful it is, if that tells you anything. Refutation is kind of nutty. What it does is it spends all of your ward and you gain a short duration buff that causes you to block all blockable hits. And it applies a parry debuff to the enemies which you've blocked, which is actually really good. The negative side of this is that if you get heavy stunned, you're pretty much dead. And it also negatively affects your heavy stun threshold, and we'll talk about that. So as you can see, cooldown does not recover until during the buff effect, which means it only recovers after the buff effect is finished. So it has a cooldown of 10 seconds and a duration of 4. So that means it's only going to be up for a certain period of time. Mine right now is currently 7.14 cooldown, which I'm currently in the way of. But 7.14 cooldown is closer to that 4 seconds, obviously, and I can have an uptime fairly good, obviously not permanent, but I can have it up most of the time. Giggity. On top of this, we also get the penalties. So the penalties are 50% less stun threshold while the buff is active, which is a really bad thing because it's going to lead you to heavy stuns, which is going to get you killed. 5% more stun threshold, though, while the buff is active per 10 runic ward spent, which means that if you have like over 100 runic ward, you're going to get a pretty large buff to your runic ward or your thing. Now, keep in mind that 50% less and 50% more do not actively cancel each other out. For instance, let's say we have 10,000 stun threshold and we have 50% penalty, then that's going to bring us down to 5,000. And if we add 50% back to that, that's only going to bring us back up to 2,500. Okay, so to get back to 10,000, how much do we need? Well, we need more than 50%. In fact, we probably need 100%. Which is going to be the amount that's going to bring us back from the penalty, essentially, right? So in this particular case, it's 5% per runic ward of 10 runic ward, which means that we would need a total of 200 runic ward divided by 10, right? 20 times 5, which is going to give us 100%. So to fully cancel out the stun threshold penalty, you're going to need at least 200 runic ward, so keep that in mind. Now, the parry debuff is actually really nice as well, and the parry debuff makes it so that targets take 50% more attack damage. Now, I am actually a parry character, and if you take a look at my parry ability, you'll see that I actually have an attack damage inflicted of 118%, which is massive. This is all the buffs that I currently have active on my character. I'm currently utilizing a lot of buffs like these here that give parry debuff magnitude. I'm also utilizing a specific jewel in my parry shield, which is 30% increased parry debuff magnitude. And as you notice, none of this seems to be applying to Refutation. So why is Refutation not getting the buffs? Well, the answer to that question is it's not getting the buffs because I'm not using a parry shield. On my swap, I actually have a regular standard armor shield specifically for the purposes of casting shield wall. However, what you'll notice is that when I switch to my parry shield, I now gain all of those debuff, the bonuses. So if you want to increase Refutation's bonus, it looks like you have to be using a parry debuff shield to cause the debuff to go up. Now, this is a large percent more damage than what the parry debuff normally gets over the regular, right? So, like, if you take that on a calculator, and let's say you're dishing out, I don't know, let's say you're dishing out 250,000 damage. Well, this is a 50% attack more, right? Which is going to be 375,000. That's a lot of additional damage. However, my character, because I currently have 118% bonus, I'm going to be looking at a much higher percentage of plus 118%, which means I'm going to do 545,000 versus your 375. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about the parry debuff magnitude, that you can increase the parry debuff magnitude, especially if you happen to be nearby those nodes. Now, we're also going to talk about this whole heavy stunning thing and why combining Refutation with parry is actually the optimal way of doing it. And this has to do with the fact that, number one, you want the parry debuff to apply to the target, right? The goal of the Refutation is either one of two things. You're either using it for defense, right? The infinite blocking, which is really nice, by the way, or you're using it for offense, which is the Parry debuff. Now, both of these, rely on one factor, which is blocking an attack and not getting heavy stuns. Okay? Now, the problem with this is that you can't block an attack that you would normally evade. Right? So if you happen to be running evasion, like if you are a evasion monk or something, evasion energy shield, or you're running armor evasion like I am, like this particular character is, I'm running armor evasion, and so I have a pretty high chance, in fact right now I'm currently 60% chance, to just simply currently evade an attack, right? Which means that even if I have Refutation activated, Refutation has only a 40% chance to activate, which is not particularly very high. Another problem is that every single time you block with Refutation, you are going to build up stun threshold, right? So every block equals stun, or rather, heavy stun threshold, which is an issue because it can potentially get you killed. So how do you deal with this problem? And how do you deal with this problem? Well, the answer to this question is that you can bypass evasion. So first off, bypass evasion by turning it off. Yes, there are ways that you can potentially turn off evasion. The first one that I'm going to show you is Parry. So Parry actually has a mechanic built into it. It says, ready your buckler to parry the next hit that you would take, blocking the hit and retaliating with the quick sweep that leaves enemies off balance, causing them to take massive increased attack damage for a short duration. Parrying causes you to accumulate heavy stun, same as Refutation. You cannot evade a hit that you would parry. Now, this is the important line here, is that when you hold up your shield to parry, you will not evade. Instead, evasion applies as an equal chance to avoid the heavy stun buildup entirely. Now, what this does is it kills two birds with one stone. Number one, it makes it so that your Refutation becomes a 100% chance. This is because when you hold your parry shield up, you can no longer evade. So you are now blocking everything 100% of the time. So in any evasion build, you can basically use the parry shield as a way to avoid this. I believe it also works with blocking too. Raise shield, it also says here, it says you cannot evade while your shield is raised. So if you're not using a parry shield and you're just using a regular shield, you can also use raise shield in this particular situation, which does the same thing. You could also use resonating shield. You could also use shield charge. There are a lot of ways that you can potentially turn off evasion and make Refutation a 100% chance, right? Now, here's the interesting thing here. Every block equals a heavy stun, right? And we don't like that. So how does Parry fix this problem? Well, Parry fixes the problem by making it so that your evasion percent now applies to heavy stun buildup instead, which means that instead of having a 40% chance not to be hit, we now have a 60% chance not to accumulate heavy stun buildup. This is important because it basically turns the heavy stun problem into a heavy stun solution, where you're basically making sure that the heavy stun never happens. To give you a practical demonstration of this, let's take a character into a map real quick, and let's go show you what it looks like. So it doesn't really matter where we go. I don't really care what the map is. And let's go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that even with Refutation active, if I'm holding down the parry button, my heavy stun actually doesn't accumulate. And you can see my heavy stun bar down here, right? So normally if I turn on Refutation, just turn on Refutation by itself and don't do anything else, you'll notice that I'm still applying the parry debuff, yes. I'm still taking damage though, which is unfortunate, but at least I'm doing something, right? The problem is that I'm still going to be taking heavy stun buildup, and this particular character is designed around heavy stun buildup, by the way. I formulated an entire character to prevent that from being an issue. However, if I'm holding down the shield, I'm not gaining any heavy stun buildup either. And the reason is because I'm essentially evading the heavy stun buildup, which is really cool. But as you can see, there's still monsters that can hit me through blocking, which is something that you do have to be aware of, is that some monsters in the game are capable of damaging through blocking, regardless of whether you're blocking the attack, right? There are unblockable hits, essentially, which will still kill you anyway. So Refutation isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card in that sense. Like, you're not going to be able to just pop Refutation and not take any damage, but it will block all blockable hits, just the same way that Parry will block all blockable hits, right? Now, the thing is that when you're holding down the Parry button, everything's a block anyway, right? So if you utilize this the right way, you can essentially go into combat. You can press Refutation and hold down the parry button, and now you will parry basically most of the screen. Instead of just parrying one or two monsters, everything becomes parry debuffed all at the same time. And this guy is really cool, but he's also very annoying when I'm trying to show things off. And you can use the parry debuff to your advantage. You can either use it passively to get a huge amount of damage increase, right? Or you can utilize it as a offensive mechanic, like in your actual parry debuff content. In this particular case, I'm going to parry debuff the wall, which is going to be really fun. These monsters are just ripping me to shreds for some reason. What damage type are they doing? Get those monsters out of the way. So if you put down a wall, you can't block a wall, right? But you can block a target and parry debuff the wall as a result, which is actually really cool. So if I put down a wall, for instance, and I can now parry debuff the wall and cause explosions along the wall. Refutation doesn't really quite do that the same way. So one of the things I noticed with Refutation is that, yes, Refutation can be used standalone, just as a component of any build to add additional damage, or you can potentially utilize it as a function of other builds, like, for instance, shield builds or parry builds. Another thing that you can potentially do with Refutation is you can convert it into another damage type. So parry debuffs have a lot of shields and things that will manipulate the way that parry debuffs work. Some of them are actually really cool for casters. There is a specific shield. It's called the Nocturn. Let me just search for it on the trade website. It's easier to pull up that way. It's called Nocturn Wooden Buckler, and it can be upgraded with a rune forged version. Here we go. And so as you can see here, I currently have the Nocturne Buckler. It says parried enemies take more spell damage instead of more attack damage. So instead of getting more attack damage, now you can switch it over and make a spell build that blocks and get more bonus that way. It depends on what you're trying to do specifically. Like if you're trying to do a cast-on build, there's a bunch of different ways that you can potentially bring this to your advantage. And you might be asking, are there any really good shields that you can utilize? Well, yeah, there's a lot of really fun shields. A lot of fun parry shields, actually. One of them is actually really good, and something that you may want to consider for a character, just simply because it is plus skills. And you can't really get plus skill shields, so it's one of the few plus skill shields in the game. And it looks like this. It's called the Sunsplitter, and it can have as much as +4 to skills to a single skill. It basically has +1, +2, and +3, and it varies which one it applies to. And upon corrupting, it can go up to +4, which makes it worth even more. Essentially allowing you to get +4 to skills on a shield. You could potentially apply this with Refutation, of course, going with the parry route and setting up things like that with plus the skills. It's actually pretty useful. It's not entirely impossible to set up parry to completely negate any heavy stun buildup. As I showed you before, I wasn't really getting any heavy stun buildup at all when I was parrying. A lot of this has to do with things like where is it? Stern's Mountain, which is 50% more stun threshold for heavy stuns while using the supported skills. There's also a cheaper and easier to get version, which is just called... Steadfast 1 and Steadfast 2, which give you 100% or 50% more stun threshold while channeling supported skills, which does in fact work with Parry as well. However, Refutation itself doesn't really get the same bonuses because it's not a channeling skill. It's harder to build heavy stun with this particular ability, and you're going to have to build it more generically, like on the passive tree or on equipment, building up your stun threshold for that. Also, having more HP helps with stun threshold. Having more armor so that you're taking less damage, more resistances so you're taking less damage, helps with heavy stun threshold. In general, the less damage you take and the more HP you have, the better your stun threshold will be. And then, of course, you can build stun threshold itself as well, which I believe you can see on... I can't remember if you can see stun threshold on here. You can see ailment threshold, which is right here. But I don't know if you can see stun threshold on this particular board. Another thing is the actual support gems that you would use for Refutation. So what are you trying to get out of Refutation in terms of support gems? I would recommend, first off, that you utilize Cooldown Recovery 2, because 10 seconds is a long time, and you're probably going to want to pop it a lot more than once every 10 seconds, or once every 14 seconds, technically, since it's 4 seconds of the buff plus 10 seconds of the cooldown, right? So if you can bring down the cooldown, that's massive. Number 2, you can also use Rapid Casting, because you don't want to have time spent in there while you're just messing around. In fact, I need to upgrade that to Rapid Casting too. And then you also want Prolonged Duration, which is going to increase the skill effect 35% more. So as you can see here, I currently have 4.21 seconds. So if I take that off, I should be at 4. No, that's the parry debuff duration, my bad. I'm looking at the wrong thing. It's not showing the buff duration. So the parry duration is the more attack damage. This is applied to the monster, not to you. So the duration of the ability is not listed. The cooldown is listed. The parry debuff duration is listed. The cast time, yeah, it's not listed on here. That's interesting. Well, it would be 35% more skill effect duration on the 4 seconds, so it lasts a little bit longer than 4 seconds. Let's take a look. Yeah, so I see mine is currently at 7 seconds, even though it doesn't say it on the skill. It might even be like 7 point something. I suppose we could just take a calculator and go 4 plus 35%, which would be 5.4. And if I have any other skill effect duration on my character, which I do, that probably is why it's up to 7 seconds. So as of right now, I'm currently at 7-second duration and 7-second cooldown. So I have about 50% uptime, right? So it's up for 7 seconds, and then it's down for 7 seconds. It's not too terrible. Anything else that you want to put on here? I'm not really sure. You could potentially use the one that increases the cooldown, but gives you a second use, so that you can have 2 uses back to back. I don't necessarily recommend that one, though, because it's going to increase the cooldown by a rather large degree. And it's going to make it much harder to get more uses out of it than those 2. But if you need a burst of defensiveness, I suppose that could be useful. Let's talk about stun threshold for a little bit, and how you could potentially build stun threshold, and how you can make your character tankier in terms of how stun threshold works. So let's go over some of the basic stun threshold nodes that you can look at as far as your character goes. So first off is a really good one. It's your heavy stun buildup empties 50% faster. So Defender's Resolve is one you can take in the really early of the warrior tree. And basically what it does is when you do build stun buildup, heavy stun buildup, it makes it so that your heavy stun buildup goes away faster. So it basically is kind of like, if you're familiar with energy shield recharge rate, it's a faster start of energy shield recharge, sort of, but for your heavy stun. It allows your heavy stun to empty at a faster pace than normal. So if we're talking about your heavy stun starts to empty at, say, I don't know, 5 seconds, then it'll be 2.5 seconds instead, and then it'll start to empty, which is a really, really good one. There's another one over here in the parry section, which is your heavy stun buildup empties 50% faster if you've successfully parried recently, which is also really good. And then there's just a whole bunch of really nice stun threshold nodes that you can grab. This one's absolutely amazing. Polished Iron, gain additional stun threshold equal to 30% of the item armor on armor items. Now, to put it into perspective on how stun threshold works, we have to talk about this for a second. So, how does stun threshold work, and how does your character get stunned? So, how do you get stunned, right? Well, there's a couple components to this. Number one, the incoming damage. This is kind of like the most important thing. It's how much damage was incoming. Larger damage numbers equals larger stuns, right? So this is something that you can mitigate. You can mitigate with, obviously armor. You can mitigate with deflection. You can mitigate with a bunch of things. Anything that reduces damage. Anything that reduces incoming damage will help the overall picture of how this functions. So stacking armor. It's a very good way of doing it. Stacking deflection. Stacking things like... well, you can also use things that reduce the damage that the monster outputs to you. Like you can use. There's a couple of them down here actually. Where are you hiding from me? Why are you hiding? So daze reduces the damage that a monster does, I believe. No, not that one. It's a debilitate. Debilitate reduces the monster that it does damage does by 10%. There's also other ways you can potentially reduce the damage that a monster does. It just depends on the debuff that you're applying to them. Then number two. So number two is your stun threshold, which you can think of your stun threshold as kind of like a multiplier for your stun base, right? And what is your stun base? Well, your stun base is your hit points or energy shield, which has its own stun threshold stuff. It's not as good. I tried to build stun threshold for energy shield, and I didn't like it, but there's a bunch of stun threshold nodes up here, like Eldritch Will, which will give you additional stun threshold equal to a percentage of your energy shield. And these are actually really good to prevent stuns from happening when you're running energy shield. Better way to do it is just don't get hit. Just don't get hit. So, how does the formula look? Well, the formula looks like this. So let's pretend a monster hits you for X damage. Or rather, let's put an actual number. Let's put 10,000 damage. And let's say that you subtract that by 50%, or let's say 75%, because you're a warrior and you've got lots of armor. Well, that means that the hit that is actually hitting you is 2,500. And then this goes up against your HP. So my current HP is 2,262, which is actually kind of low. And that equals my stun threshold, right? Now, the thing is that my stun threshold is also being multiplied by the additional bonuses to stun threshold that I have. So that 2,262 or whatever is getting bonuses. So it's getting, it's getting plus 300% stun threshold or whatever, which is giving me a stronger defense against the incoming hit. Then the incoming hit, after it's mitigated, is then applied to my HP, which then determines the heavy stun amount, right? So you can see that there's a lot of ways that you can potentially help defend against this. So what are the ways that you can potentially help defend against this? Well, number one is more hit points. The more hit points you have, the harder it is for them to stun you, because it acts as the base of the stun threshold, right? Number two is more mitigation, right? Mitigation. More mitigation is always good because it lowers the incoming damage, which is going up against your base, which is obviously how you end up getting stunned. And number three is more stun threshold, which stun threshold is, of course, the multiplier for your hit points, which is then going up against the mitigations, which applies the heavy stun. Now, I showed you guys another way of potentially dealing with it, which is utilizing evasion. Evasion allows you to avoid heavy stun, but only while your shield or buckler is raised. So that's also something that you can utilize because that just simply avoids the heavy stun buildup entirely. And then I also showed you other ways that you can potentially mitigate this, which is even if you are building up heavy stun, which, you know, will happen eventually if you're not built properly or you're a newbie, right? There are ways that you can potentially cause the heavy stun to empty faster, like Defender's Resolve. So Defender's Resolve is really good because it allows you to mitigate the problem, right? So the problem is that I've generated heavy stun on my character. How do I get rid of it? And I want to get rid of it quickly because I want to keep using the ability, right? So things like Defender's Resolve will allow you to empty the heavy stun bar faster, right? And this is important because if you can empty the heavy stun bar faster, then that means you can get back to using the Refutation and using the ability to your advantage. Other than that, there's really not a lot more to it. You can't just simply use Refutation without doing some sort of mitigation for this stuff. If you don't build any kind of, you know, like bonus, like stun threshold or anything, if you don't have your hit points up, if your mitigations aren't good, if you don't at least have some stun threshold, you're going to find yourself on the floor heavy stunned a lot. But if you do your due diligence and you increase your hit points to a significant level, if you increase your mitigation so they're actually in a good spot, which you need to do anyway, right? You need to not die. That would be great. And then also adding some stun threshold here and there as far as like passive points go. It's not really a big deal. Like grabbing things like Defender's Resolve is pretty easy to do. There's also this one right here. The armor one, which gives you 30% stun threshold equal to your armor. There's tons of stun threshold stuff all over the place that you can potentially take that will help you avoid the stun threshold. And you just need to just take a little bit of time and look around the board and find them. Like Feel No Pain gives you 20% increased stun threshold. I also find that adding in a healthy amount of evasion is nice because, of course, you know, not getting hit. If you reduce the frequency of hits, that helps out a lot as well. And that's one of the problems with Refutation is that if you're running a build that doesn't have evasion, so let's assume you're running a pure armor, energy shield, or energy shield, right? No evasion. Then Refutation is going to block everything, which means you're going to get 100% block chance, no evasions, which means that you're going to have a large number of hits coming in at one time. Reducing the frequency at which those hits occur also is a way that you can help mitigate the heavy stun buildup as well, just simply making it so that you're not having to block so many hits in such a short period of time. I think that's pretty much it. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching. I hope you guys are enjoying this series. Refutation is an amazing ability, and you should definitely add it into your character if you have the ability to. At least test it and see if you can get away with the stun threshold limits. And as always, keep watching.